We are going to be learning about how to graph quadratics in standard form. So just as a reminder, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So last week we would factor when things were in standard form and we would put them in the box. So we should at least recognize this form. So before we start going into more complicated quadratics, we are going to look at just the parent function. So you guys should remember the parent function is the most basic function. So for example, a line, the parent function would just be x. And for a parabola, or we can say quadratic, the parent function is x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and also label parent function. So I would recommend taking notes as you watch the video, and if you need to pause at any point, that's completely fine. So what we're going to do is go ahead and plug in some points. So we're going to make an XY table. So typically, we want to plug in both negative and positive values, but we're going to start noticing patterns as we get more into graphing quadratics. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So when we plug in -2, you would plug it into your equation, -2 squared, and -2 squared is 4, because it's -2 times -2. When you plug in -1, -1 squared is -1 times -1, which is 1. When you plug in 0, 0 squared is 0. When you plug in 1, 1 squared is 1. And when you plug in 2, 2 squared is 4. And I should actually change my y to f of x, which is the output value. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and graph that information. And I'm just going to use the grid lines as my numbers. Okay, so we have 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 4, -1, 1, -2, 4. So I know a lot of you should recognize this graph, and it's a, like I said, parabola, or we can call it a quadratic. And so now we're going to answer just a couple questions. So we can notice that it's a U-shaped graph, and it's also a function because it passes the vertical line test. Each input has exactly one output. So we're going to answer a couple of things. First, let's talk about the domain. So remember, the domain is all possible input values, or x values. So looking at this graph, we can really put any x value into the function. It could be positive or negative. And as we look at the graph, it's going to go to the left and to the right forever. So we can say all real numbers. All right. Range is all possible y values, or output values. So we can see that it's definitely not all real numbers because it starts at 0 and it's just everything above 0. So how we would say that is y is greater than or equal to 0. All right, we're going to talk about x-intercept and y-intercept. So the x-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the x-axis, and the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So in this case, both the x and y-intercept are 0, 0. All right, and last thing, which we should recognize because we talked about vertex with absolute value graphs, it's where the graph changes or turns positions in this case. So the vertex would be, I'm going to highlight it, this point right here. So the vertex is going to be 0, 0. All right, so this is the parent function. So again, it's the most basic function. And now we're going to go ahead and look at one more graph, but now it's not going to be the parent function. So this time we want to graph f of x equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and plug in some points, and sometimes it might take us a little bit to kind of see the shape, but we definitely want to be able to know where the vertex is, and I'm going to go back up to this graph, we can see that as we look at this graph, the vertex is the center point, not necessarily because it's in the middle of the points, but what I mean by that is it starts reflecting about the vertex by having a 1 and a 4 on both sides. So we want to try and find that vertex by plugging in points and then seeing a pattern around the vertex. All right, so we're going to go ahead and plug in points. We'll start off with what we did last time, which was -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and we'll kind of see where that takes us. So I'm going to plug in -2, so that would be -2 squared minus 2 times -2 minus 3. So lots of work here. So -2 squared is 4. -2 times -2 is +4, and then minus 3. So this would be 5. All right, looking at the next one, we would have -1 squared minus 2 times -1 minus 3. So -1 squared is 1. -2 times -1 is +2, and then minus 3. So 1 plus 2 is 3, minus 3 is 0. All right, now we plug in 0, which is an easy number. So 0 squared minus 2 times 0 minus 3. So 0 minus 0 minus 3. All right, so far we're not really seeing any sort of pattern, so we'll keep going. We plug in 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 3. So 1 squared is 1, -2 times 1 is -2, and -3. So 1 minus 2 is -1 minus 3 is -4. Still haven't found that vertex. And then we'll plug in 2. So 2 squared minus 2 times 2 minus 3. So we get 4 minus 4 minus 3. So we would get -3. So what we can see here is that we start seeing a pattern. So in other words, 1, -4 is our vertex, because when we look, that's where it starts reflecting. So we can take a guess that if I were to plug in 3, the number would be 0, because that would be the next number in the pattern. Okay, so we will go ahead and graph this. So the first number we have is, we could graph -2, 5 if we would like, but we don't need it. And then -1, 0, 0, -3, 1, -4, 2, -3, 3, 0. And so we could guess that this one, which is 4, will also be 5. So typically when we graph a parabola, I like us to have 5 points. So that would be recommended. So quickly answering the same questions we did before. So the domain is still going to be all real numbers. And we should kind of be able to figure out that the domain for any parabola is going to be all real numbers. The range is not y is greater than or equal to 0, because our lowest point is now -4. So the range would actually be y is greater than or equal to -4. Okay, and then our x-intercepts are where it crosses the x-axis. So there's 2 of them. One of them is at -1, 0, and the other one is at 3, 0. All right, and then the y-intercept is at 0, -3. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, if I were to actually factor x squared minus 2x minus 3. So x squared minus 2x minus 3. So if I were to factor that, I'd put it in my box. I'd have x squared -3. So I'd have -3x squared. And I'd have -2x. I need 2 numbers that multiply to -3 and add to -2. I put those in. And I get x minus 3 and x plus 1. So I want us to look at these factors, x plus 1 and x minus 3, and think about how those relate to the x-intercepts. So just kind of think about that because that's going to be helping us with the next lesson.